Welcome to Thrive with Pride from Age Options, an online space for LGBT older adults and those who care for them. This is a recording of a live event held on Zoom. Amanda Wojan, Age Options Caregiver Resource Program Coordinator, shared information about caregiving for caregivers and service providers, with an eye to how these issues are particularly acute in the LGBT community or just a little bit different. Please fill out a quick survey after you view this video to help us improve our programming. The survey is anonymous and will take less than 10 minutes. A link to the survey, plus a link to a copy of Amanda's slides, and more helpful links and documents are also below in the video description. Thank you so much for watching. Go. All right, and welcome everyone once again to our November Thrive with Pride plenary. This is a monthly meeting from Age Options offering information and some chat to our LGBT older adults and those who care for them. This is Family Caregiving Month, the month of November. So I'm pleased to introduce Amanda Wojan. Amanda Wojan received her master's degree in public health from University of Illinois at Chicago in 2018. She then joined Age Options as the planning and advocacy specialist, but she now works as the caregiver programs coordinator. Amanda works on caregiver-related legislative advocacy and to support our funded partner agencies who provide services to caregivers. Originally from Michigan, she's now been in Chicago for 5 years, and we're very pleased, Amanda, to have you here. You can take it away when you're ready.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kate. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here to talk with you all and meet you all today. So as Kate mentioned, I am Amanda Wojan, the Caregiver Programs Coordinator at Age Options. I've been in this role now for 5 or 6 months, but I've been with Age Options for a couple of years now. So I'm going to talk to you all about caregiving, just kind of in general, and then honing in specifically on LGBT caregiving relationships and talking about how, like Kate mentioned, November is National Family Caregiver Awareness Month. So that's why we're kind of doing this presentation this month. And I did want to say just at the beginning that we will be sharing my slides after the presentation, so you'll all have access to my slides. And if you want them ASAP, if you want them right now during the presentation, you can put your email in the chat box, and there's a link to receive them as a PDF that you can get. Kate or Caitlin can send to you, but you will, no matter what, get a copy of my slides. And there are some links throughout the slides that take you to some resources to learn more about some of the things that I'm talking about. So you'll be able to access everything that I talk about once you have access to those slides. All right. So getting started, as we've mentioned, November is National Family Caregiver Awareness Month. So every year in November, we kind of celebrate family caregivers and just kind of promote the awareness of what it means to be a family caregiver and all the work that they do, and highlight some of the challenges that role of being a family caregiver comes with. And of course, this year we are living through an extremely challenging time with this global health pandemic and crisis. And so the theme of this year's National Family Caregiver Awareness Month is actually caregiving in crisis. So the Caregiver Action Network kind of sets the themes each year. And if you click on the link, it says click here for more resources. You can learn a little bit more about the theme and just some resources that caregivers can be connected to support the extra challenges of being a caregiver during this time. Because of course, caregiving is always a challenging role, but there's some compounding and additional challenges during this time when we're all facing a lot of unknowns and a lot of challenges. So again, caregiving in crisis is the theme this month, and there's also a social media toolkit and all different kinds of resources you can access by clicking on that link and going to the Caregiver Action Network website. And you can help spread the word as well. I know we only have a few days left of November, but we always want to promote the awareness of family caregivers. So what is a family caregiver? A family caregiver is defined as a relative, a friend, or a neighbor, or really anyone who cares about another person who is providing assistance to that someone that they care about related to that person's underlying physical or mental disability and assist them with their activities of daily living. So they're informal caregivers. They're doing a job, a challenging job, but they're often unpaid and don't really receive formal training to provide those services. So when we say family caregiver, this can be kind of confusing or off-putting for folks, especially LGBT individuals, because when we hear the word family, we kind of assume biological family, relatives, but really family caregivers refers to family of choice. It refers to friends, neighbors, anyone who's providing this kind of informal care to someone that they love and care about. So that's kind of an important thing to note, that we say family caregiver, but we mean just kind of these informal caregivers that are providing care to their loved ones. So there are some different types of LGBT caregiving relationships that I will highlight that are kind of the common relationships that we might want to consider as individuals and as providers. So there are LGBT older adults caring for other LGBT older adults. So this is kind of a peer network caring for each other. And the peer networks where LGBT older adults find care stem from families of choice and providing critical support in times of need, often in the absence of biological family. So this may mean, you know, an older adult who identifies as LGBT caring for another older adult who identifies as LGBT and their friends. And it may be a result of, you know, the care recipient not having biological family members that are supportive of their identity and being kind of displaced from their family. It may be a result of that LGBT identifying older adult not having children or a spouse that would step in and provide that care. So there are lots of different reasons why this may be a caregiving relationship that arises, but it is an important one to be aware of. And it's important to acknowledge because this really is kind of the most vulnerable caregiving relationship of those I have up on the screen, because it is, you know, an older adult caring for another older adult. And so the caregiver may not be able to provide those caregiver services long term, and may have concern about who will take over the caregiving duties when they're no longer able to do so. And it just kind of comes with some added challenges and stressors because of that. Then we see caregivers who happen to identify as LGBT. So that, you know, an example would be when a group of siblings needs to provide care for an aging parent, we see that it's actually common for the LGBT member of the group to become that primary caregiver and to step up to be the caregiver. And there's not necessarily a clear answer as to why that may be the case, but some speculation may be that the LGBT child, you know, may not be married or have children of their own potentially, and so they're perceived to have more time to take on the caregiving duties. But there's all different kinds of reasons why this may be the case. But that, you know, is an example of an instance where an LGBT identifying person is caregiving for someone. And then we see type 3, which is others caring for LGBT older adults. So for example, you know, maybe a niece is caring for their LGBT identifying aunt or uncle. And this is an important one to consider too, because as a non-LGBT person caring for someone, the caregiver may feel very welcomed in a wide variety of organizations or settings and may feel very comfortable receiving supportive services, but may realize that when they're seeking services for the care recipient, that they find that LGBT affirming or specific services are hard to come by. So it's kind of an interesting other type of relationship to navigate. And this can apply to paid caregivers as well who are caring for LGBT identifying older adults. So just some things to consider there. So we'll kind of dive a little deeper here. So looking specifically at LGBT caregivers, the data suggests that LGBT individuals, like I mentioned, become caregivers slightly more often than non-LGBT folks. And again, we don't really know why that may be the case. There's some speculation on it that like I said, they may be more likely to become caregivers because they don't have children of their own that they're caring for, but all different kinds of reasons. But we actually see that 9% of all family caregivers self-identify as LGBT, which is a very large number of US family caregivers identifying as LGBT when we consider that the number of people in the US in general that self-identify as LGBT is only 4.5%. So we really do see that when we look at self-identifying, which of course may not be the most accurate numbers, but still it's showing that we have a large percentage of family caregivers self-identifying as LGBT individuals. So some experiences that LGBT identified caregivers may face, so we're not saying that this is what all LGBT identified caregivers experience, but some experiences they're more likely to come across are more likely to provide care in isolation. So, meaning they are the only one providing care for a person, they're the only sole caregiver, or they're reluctant to access supportive services due to fear of discrimination or facing stigma. And this can lead to social isolation and high stress burden. So, this is really important to consider. Again, they may be less likely to disclose the relationship to the person that they're caring for, due again to fear of stigma or discrimination. And we do see that LGBT identifying caregivers do have more non-traditional caregiving relationships, for example, caring for an ex. And that might just be something that they're not so comfortable disclosing because it is something that may be perceived as non-traditional by providers, and just providers might not understand why they're doing that. So just kinds of things that are more common within the LGBT caregiving world and important to consider. And then more likely to face legal issues. So when we talk about family of choice, that's often not legally recognized. So that can be challenging with a caregiving relationship, in terms of like making decisions for the person they're caring for and being, recognized as the caregiver. Those legal issues can be challenging for non-biological family members who are providing care, and more likely to experience family conflict. And this may just be because other members of the family do not accept their identity, or things like that, but that just adds challenges to the caregiving role and to the caregiving relationship. Right. So then looking at caring for an LGBT older adult. So we see actually that LGBT older adults are quite isolated, more so than non-LGBT older adults. 40% of LGBT older adults aged 45 to 75 say that their support networks have become smaller over time. And that's compared to only 27% of non-LGBT older adults. So there is a significant, we see that significantly more with LGBT older adults. And we talked about the importance of like the peer networks and the family of choice and caregiving for others who may be within your peer group, your own age group. So this is all just important to consider, that we see kind of the peer support networks actually shrinking over time. And that's something that's important to consider as providers and as caregivers within this world. And so LGBT older adults also with Alzheimer's disease or related dementias, of course, face compounding challenges. So additional risk of isolation and other kinds of challenges. And something that was brought up on a webinar that I was actually on that's interesting to consider as well is older adults who do have Alzheimer's disease and dementia may forget that they have come out repeatedly to their caregiver or to others that they're interacting with. And it's important to consider that every time that they come out, it might be just as emotionally taxing and stressful as the previous time. And you have to kind of take it seriously every time, even if it happened just last week. They forgot that they did it last week, so it's important to kind of treat it as a serious thing that's happening every time. And I just thought that was interesting as well, and important to consider as a caregiver. Okay. So now looking at what providers can specifically do, it's really important to make sure that a space is proactively welcoming to LGBT individuals. And when we say proactively welcoming, we mean that LGBT identifying folks or their caregivers are aware that your establishment or agency is welcoming without having to, already be in relationships with you and having conversations with you. So it's something that's obvious from your website or something hanging on your building, for example, having a pride flag on your sign or things like that. So it's something that's, the first thing someone will notice when they're like researching your agency. It's just like very proactively obvious that you're an LGBT affirming and open space. Again, expanding the definition of family. So when I talked about how the term family caregiver can be off-putting for folks, it's important to think of that when you're having conversations with clients, caregivers, or older adults, and potentially even on intake forms, kind of defining what you mean by family caregiver, or dropping the word family, or just making it very clear that this includes family of choice and it includes non-biological family members, to make it more of an open and welcoming and affirming space for everyone. Ensuring that all older adults have advanced directives. So this is really important for every single older adult, but particularly important for LGBT older adults. When we talk about advanced directives, it means them kind of telling their caregiver and telling the doctors what they want to have happen to them once they reach a point that they no longer can determine that for themselves, or, you know, express that themselves. And this is important for LGBT older adults in particular, because if they are, you know, being cared for by a family of choice caregiver, someone that's not legally able to make choices for them, they need to outline what they want for themselves so that it doesn't end up falling to a biological family member that maybe isn't supportive of their identity, and that wouldn't carry through with what that older adult would want for themselves. So this is just something extra important to consider for LGBT older adults, but it's important for everyone as well to kind of clearly outline what their wishes and desires are for themselves once they're in a place where they cannot clearly talk about that. And then advocating for the caregiver's role as a caregiver, regardless of the legal relationship. So just being, you know, affirming of all different types of caregiver relationships and roles. And then asking open-ended questions and maintaining cultural humility. So this is just important because, you know, as providers, we are all experts on every topic area, but having that cultural humility is really just important to recognize and, you know, acknowledge, okay, I don't know everything, but I want to be open to you. I want to be accepting, meet clients where they're at, and just be open to learning and meeting the client's needs where they may be in that moment. So just maintaining that open-mindedness is of course important. And right here, there's a link to a guide to engaging and supporting LGBT plus caregivers. So you can take a look at that once the slides are shared. All right, so this slide just has some more resources on it, learning more about LGBT caregiving. So there's some resources from SAGE, and then there's 2 research study opportunities, one for LGBT spouses and partner caregivers, and then one from the Idea Center, where it's actually for the caregiver and the care recipient to participate in, I believe, 5 phone interviews. And one of those people, the caregiver or the care recipient, needs to be LGBT identifying. And this is specifically for a care recipient with memory loss, with a dementia or something along those lines. And both of those research opportunities do come with a monetary award for participants. So this is just something, you know, to keep in mind if it applies to you, but also can be shared out to your networks as well. Okay, so looking specifically at social isolation. So I did already mention this, but both LGBT identified caregivers and older adults experience increased risk for social isolation when compared to non-LGBT caregivers and older adults. And so this is important and is something that Age Options has been committed to combating for the past few years, but I mean, it's always something that's important to us, but it's been kind of our main initiative over the past few years. And it's important because social isolation has impacts on someone's physical and mental wellness. And there are studies that show it has the same mortality risk factors as smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. So that demonstrates that it really is, you know, a serious thing to take into consideration and to work to combat and reduce. It's serious for both physical and mental health and wellness. So connecting LGBT caregivers and older adults with resources and with, you know, opportunities to connect and engage is important. And it's also important to make sure that they are LGBT affirming resources, of course. And there is a resource for socially isolated LGBT older adults through SAGE, the SAGE LGBT Elder Hotline. And the number is provided there. And it's important to note that this is offered in both Spanish and English, which is great. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about specifically the Age Options Caregiver Network. So I mentioned I'm the Caregiver Programs Coordinator. So Age Options, of course, is the area agency on aging. We don't do the direct service. We're not the ones necessarily directly connecting with caregiver clients, but we fund and manage and support 9 caregiver resource centers that are located across suburban Cook County. So we have a few in the north, a few in the west, a few in the south. And you can find the Caregiver Resource Center near your home address by clicking on the link there, and that's our referral page. And you can, of course, share that out with your folks as well. But the Caregiver Resource Centers provide a whole bunch of resources for family caregivers, support groups, one-on-one clinical counseling, training, and educational series about different elements of caregiving, like using assistive devices and technology, legal services. And we have a class called Stress Busting for Family Caregivers, which is an educational series that goes across 9 weeks and talks about how to cope with stress and really handle the stress of being a family caregiver for someone with dementia specifically. And then they connect folks to respite. So this means bringing someone in, a paid person into the home to provide the caregiving for, however long for that day, to give the caregiver a break, to let them go do errands or take a nap or take some self-care time. So respite's a really important resource that a lot of our caregivers take advantage of. And then gap filling, which is temporary, one-time financial assistance for caregivers if they find that they cannot afford something one month, if they can't afford rent or utilities for a month, or if they can't afford materials and supplies that they need for the care recipient, like adult diapers or things like that. The gap filling funds come in, and the Caregiver Resource Center can cover costs for caregivers when eligible. So there is a link here, Caregiving in the LGBT Community Resource Guide, which just talks about, again, what our Caregiver Resource Centers can do and how you can get connected to them, and how LGBT caregiving can be a little unique compared to just general family caregiving. And then we have our Relatives Raising Children program. So this is a subset of the Caregiver Resource Centers where they provide caregiver support to non-parent relatives of any age that are raising children. So this would be like a grandparent raising a grandchild, or an aunt raising their niece. So any non-parent relative that's raising a child is eligible for Relatives Raising Children supports, and our Caregiver Resource Centers provide support groups, counseling, and gap filling for those types of caregivers as well. And so there are 2 links in here. So thank you, Caitlin, who created these flyers. There's a flyer for if you are a relative raising a child, and there's a flyer for if you're a professional that may work with relatives raising children, how you can help get the word out and learn more. So specifically here, looking at some of the initiatives and programs we have currently going on to keep us connected, because of course we talked about social isolation being a challenge, and we want to work to address it, especially during COVID times where we're being told to physically distance and stay apart from each other, but we still want to stay engaged. So Age Options has a network of memory cafes across suburban Cook County. We have 15 or 16 cafes that are being facilitated by our Caregiver Resource Centers and some specific cultural agencies that have cafes for specific cultural and ethnic groups in specific languages. So we have some in Spanish, some in Mandarin, Korean, lots of different cool programs, and you can learn more by clicking the link here. And a memory cafe is a space for someone who has concerns about their memory. It doesn't have to be a dementia diagnosis, but they may have dementia diagnosis. So that person is the older adult, the care recipient, and their caregiver. So both come together as a pair. And normally these would happen in person, but right now they're happening over Zoom. And it's just a place for the caregiver and the care recipient to come together, have fun, be in a stigma-free, relaxing space, and do a fun activity. Like art therapy or music therapy or something like that. So we always welcome referrals and participation in the Memory Cafe, so please help us spread the word. And then our Good Memories Sing-Along Cafe is a specific type of memory cafe that we've partnered with this organization called Sounds Good Choir to put on, and this happens every Wednesday from 1 to 2 p.m. And it's just like it sounds, a sing-along memory cafe for older adults with concerns about their memory and their caregiver. And it's just super fun singing along to songs from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and I'm sure there's going to be some fun holiday songs coming up. So it's a really great cafe opportunity. And then quickly, I just wanted to talk about Caring Together Living Better, which is our caregiver initiative in the faith-based community in the West Suburbs. So we currently have 6 partners here, but this is specifically looking to support Black and Hispanic caregivers in the West Suburbs, because we've kind of come to realize through both research and our own anecdotal experience that African American and Hispanic caregivers are more likely to be comfortable accessing services through their faith communities and through their churches, as opposed to these traditional senior support service agencies. So this partnership is us funding churches in the West Suburbs to support them in helping caregivers. And so you can learn more about that through that link. So I think I maybe went over a little bit, but I want to thank you again so much for letting me talk, and let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you again to Amanda Wojan for her great presentation. We had time afterwards for a live Q&A. Check out the video description below for more information, a copy of Amanda's slides, and some helpful links. Please also join us for our next monthly event on December 22nd at 11 a.m., when we will welcome the Senior Rainbow Assistance Program to talk to us about giving back during the holidays. Remember to fill out the quick anonymous survey in the video description below, and be in touch with Age Options if you have any other questions or need assistance during the holidays. Thank you for watching.